Good afternoon and welcome to Socialsuite's ESG Go webinar. My name is Jessica Schlosser and I manage Socialsuite's business development. Socialsuite's ESG Go platform supports companies in taking their first steps in ESG reporting with intuitive software, expert sustainability consulting services to guide them on their ESG journey, and templates to share their great progress with stakeholders. The platform is built around a core set of 21 ESG metrics defined by the World Economic Forum, which were specifically devised to be simple and easy to adopt. ESG reporting is simply collating all the great work companies are doing already into a succinct one-page template to grab the attention of stakeholders quickly and get the recognition they deserve. Today, institutional investors and VC funds are using ESG disclosure as a risk mitigation tool to be eligible for portfolio inclusion. Without this, you are significantly reducing your potential investment opportunities, both locally and overseas. All of our members have experienced highly successful capital raisings by getting on the radar of tier 1 and 2 capital providers. We can help you put your best foot forward and experience this also at an affordable fee. I'm joined by our head of ESG, Dr. Tim Seigenbeek van Hoekelom, who is our head of ESG, to talk about how to kickstart your ESG journey. Throughout the presentation, please don't hesitate to ask questions in the chat box on the right, and we'll respond at the end. And now I'll hand over to Tim. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jessica. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar today about kickstarting your ESG journey with Socialsuite. What I'll do today is I'll take you briefly through the ESG landscape and the urgency around ESG at the moment. We'll talk a bit about how ESG really is industry agnostic. Basically, it applies to everyone. Then we'll look at what are some of those hurdles that we really in particular see small and mid-sized enterprises have around ESG. Then how do we help them start to build ESG credentials? What's involved in that process? We'll then look at the importance of standardized, recognized, and structured ESG solutions. And we'll drill in a little bit about what are the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, in relation to environmental, social governance. Finally, we'll look at reporting on both maturity, progress you're making, and the actual disclosures you're making on ESG. And then finally, we'll finish up with how can you start today with that ESG journey. So first off, that landscape. So what do we see at large happening around ESG, and really specifically for small to medium-sized businesses? It's really, at the moment, there's a large shift in the world around pressures that really is moving shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism. And what does that mean? What we see is this movement in thinking around, traditionally, everyone was focused on just maximizing profits for shareholders. And there's now this concept more where people are thinking really what we should be doing is creating sustained and shared value for all the stakeholders involved. And what we then mean is all stakeholders is in the people side. It is indeed still the shareholders, but it's also the employees. It's also the communities you operate with, the consumers that you might provide services or products to. So it's everyone at large, but also stakeholders, the planet at large. It's the biodiversity, it's our natural resources, it is our climate. They're all stakeholders at large. So how can we make sure that whatever value we create benefits all of them? Now, this massive shift then that we see here is really driven by kind of a move to more responsible capital deployment that's really underpinning that stakeholder capitalism. At large, there's also some regulatory legislative changes we see throughout different geographies and jurisdictions in the world. But really, across every industry, there's a lot of societal pressure that we need to do things in a more responsible, sustainable, and particularly transparent way, that we all see what are we doing, what are our impacts at large on the world and on the people in the world, and how can we do better? Now, global financial markets are measuring this shift by looking at how companies are performing from an ESG point of view. So they're looking at ESG data sets, ESG credentials. So this demand for credentials is really now putting a lot of pressure on small to mid-cap companies who often have not started sustainability or ESG reporting. So they're now really facing this need to do something in this space, to start an ESG journey, but they don't really know how to get started. And we'll talk about that a bit more today in this webinar. So like I said, ESG is industry agnostic. So it's not really focused on one industry, like take fossil fuels. Everyone knows there's a lot of pressure on that industry, to phase out fossil fuel use, to be more cleaner in our energy use, to move to renewables. So there's a big energy transition happening. But from an ESG point of view, every industry faces its own unique set of sustainability related issues. And those issues are not just risks. Yes, there's risk mitigation, but also a lot of opportunities there. So in the financial services, in healthcare, in tech, everyone faces their own issues, but are on that spectrum of, what is it an environmental issues? Is it a social? Is it a governance issue? And they're all have their own materiality. They're all relevant in different ways, but everyone should be looking at that. So what do we see then in terms of what's stopping companies with starting ESG reporting? They feel that urgency, they're aware that they should be doing something, but what are the issues? Well, we're kind of almost passing by the first one here, but there's still a few companies saying, is it really worthwhile to start doing something on ESG? I think Jess already pointed it out at the introduction. Investors at large are looking now at, are you doing something in this space? Can we see what you're doing from an environmental, social governance point of view? If you're not doing anything there, if you're not disclosing where your business is, it can't assess your performance there, really not interested in investing in you. So there are really worthwhile benefits. But also what's stopping companies is asking those questions like, do we have the resources, the time, the capacity? We're not really ready yet. We're not perfect. We can't really afford any of the big consulting firms to come in and look at setting an ESG strategy or helping us work out what is that framework we're going to use. It's all too hard to get started. There's this proliferation of frameworks and standards and principles. We don't really know what to do. So these are common things we hear all the time. So what it really means then is it's just finding that starting point to build genuine ESG credentials, to make a commitment, but then also follow through on it. And for most companies, a logical first step is to really look at that reporting piece. Can you set a baseline around where you are today as a company and just disclosing some of the things you're already doing? So there's a lot of work you potentially already do. Might be some regulation from your regulator that you have to do in terms of financials you have to disclose if you're a listed company. It might be some other things in terms of great community programs you already have on the social side, equity, diversity, inclusion, policies, strategies that you implement. So there's probably a lot already happening. Bring that down to a standardized reporting framework and start to show the world what you're actually already doing, but also learn some of the things that framework is asking you to also disclose. Now, while you're doing that as a starting point, your ESG reporting, it almost automatically morphs into a gap analysis of how can I do better? How can I improve the quality of my ESG disclosures? So that's in the center here, the excellence around ESG. That's really looking at meaningful ESG action plans, benchmarking, scoring, rating. How can we be better here? Getting some real good insight, advice, coaching on that. But at large then, if you're reporting and if you're improving the quality of your reporting and of how you operate your business, then there's also telling that story. And that's something that some people quite easily forget. It's really important that when you commit to ESG and when you go do your reports and when you integrate a lot of this work, you really need to tell the world as well what you're doing here. It's really important that you show your stakeholders that you're on a journey, what steps are you taking, and regularly report to them, not only your actual disclosures, but the progress you're making, the things you're doing, the process you're going through to get to those disclosures. So what we do, and Jess already spoke to this in the introduction, but what I really want to pick out is with our ESG Go solution, we help you build those ESG credentials from that reporting point of view. And how we make it easy for companies to get started is that we focus on three core things. We focus on a standardized ESG framework. We focus on a framework that's not just standardized, but also recognized. So make sure it's something that a lot of companies are already using, that people see as a really front runner framework in terms of ESG disclosures. And a framework that can actually be structured into actionable and demonstrable actions you can take and progress you can make on a quarterly basis. So that really enables you to, like I said, explain that journey, craft that narrative around what you're doing. So those three things I'll dive in a bit more in the next few slides. So first, let's get started with standardized. There's a lot of frameworks out there. You might have heard of a few of them, but there's a proliferation now of all these things, and we don't really know anymore, especially if you're not really into ESG as a specialist. You've heard all these acronyms, but you don't know what your starting point is. That was recognized by the World Economic Forum. Their international business coalition said, yeah, we need to harmonize this. We need to standardize this, that anyone who wants to get started has a core framework that they can quickly kick off with and do the right thing. So they got the big four accounting firms to draw up that framework. They spent about a year in consultation globally to work out what in those existing frameworks that are already out there that a lot of companies use, how can we harmonize that and consolidate that into a core set of stakeholder capitalism metrics. They came up with 21 core metrics and 34 additional metrics. That framework is built around 4 pillars. It's built around governance, planet, people, and prosperity. And what we've done is we've taken this stakeholder capitalism metrics ESG framework, there's 21 core metrics, disclosures, and we really operationalized them. And what that means is we made them accessible, understandable, and really action focused. So the framework is exactly the same, but we built a solution around that enables you to quite quickly, with minimum amount of time every month, to look at what are some key things we can do in this quarter to demonstrate at the end of the quarter that we actually are making progress toward a full set of disclosures under this framework. And then at the end of the quarter, demonstrate to stakeholders what we actually have done. So that's a key thing there. Making sure that you know what you're doing it, telling the world what you've done, and repeat. So a key question we get in that process working with this framework is a lot of companies ask, well, this sounds like a really sensible, logical, and comparable framework, which it is, but we're already aligned with a few sustainable development goals, SDGs. Is that not the same thing? Are the SDGs not an ESG framework, and aren't we already doing this? Now, that's something that's really important to just briefly pick apart and briefly look at. The SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals, were adopted by the United Nations in 2015, really looking at setting the high-level goals, attaining the ideal kind of sustainable society by 2030. So it's high-level goals, 17 very high-level goals that the whole world, every individual, every company, every country, we're all contributing to that. And under there's a whole range of targets, 169 targets that we can work towards. And those targets hang on to those 17 goals. But these are goals and targets. Now, as a business, how do you actually demonstrate you're contributing to a target and to a goal? Well, that's where, at the core of what you do at your business, how you operate and govern your business, that's where ESG comes in. ESG gives you a framework and a method and a process to demonstrate the things you're doing. So take, for instance, one of the indicators in the World Economic Forum's framework on the planet is greenhouse gas emissions. So if you as a company start adopting this framework and you start disclosing your carbon footprint and then work out how can you reduce, potentially can you offset, what you're doing there is you have a method and a process, and you can transparently demonstrate how you are doing these things. It's comparable. Every other company adopting this framework is doing the same thing, but it directly translates in those targets and goals. Take, for instance, the SDG 13 on climate action, 15 life on land, and so on. So you can directly link the work you're doing at a core level of your business in terms of your environmental, social, and governance disclosures and link that to the Sustainable Development Goals. So in short, the SDGs are goals and the ESG disclosures are methods and processes, and they really fit together quite nicely, as you see in this image here. So let's move then to recognized. And what we really talk about here is the adoption of this framework. This World Economic Forum's stakeholder capitalism metric framework, it was designed and released in 2020, so September 2020. And what that really means is that it's been around for just over a year now, but already it's a really widespread, globally adopted and recognized framework that a lot of companies have reported on in their annual reports. A lot of companies have also said we're committed in our next annual report to start disclosing against this framework. So that really makes sure that it's standardized and it's recognized. So you really can't go wrong with this framework. And when you start your journey with those 21 indicators, a lot of companies then ask, like, but can we do more? Can we disclose that? Yes, the 34 additional indicators. And no one says that if you're disclosing your your ESG metrics, you can't do more. And we see a lot of companies that are ready now using our platform and reporting on those 21 metrics. They're doing a lot more. They got above and beyond the core requirements of this framework. And that framework, that thinking around those disclosures, it really drives their core strategy setting, the way they operate their business, and really helps them think through those next steps around excellence. How can we do things better? Which all, in the end, benefits the business, but also all the stakeholders at large. And the final element is structured. And of course, anyone can take those 21 indicators on the World Economic Forum, go read it through and start working out a way to report on it. But what we find with small, medium-sized business in particular is that it's a lot of work to tease out how you're going to report on that. What are the steps that get you to a full disclosure? So we've done the work there. We've really operationalized and broken each indicator into a number of maturity actions. So there's small things you can do. You can track the progress over time, working towards a full disclosure and building a full disclosure report of 21 disclosures. So how we do that is when you sign up to our platform, the first thing we do is we sit down with you, one of our ESG experts, and we take you through those 21 metrics and we set a baseline. It's really simply getting an idea of where are you today. So, and that's why it's not important to be perfect now. It's more important to set that baseline so that when you start your work, you kick off that ESG reporting journey, you can actually see, compared to your baseline, quarter over quarter, the progress you've made. And that's really what the market wants to see at this point, is that you're committed, you're making progress, and they want to see what that progress is. And then ultimately, they want to see those disclosures scores as well. So how that works then is once we set the baseline, which is we'll go through an empty set that you see on the left here, empty set of disclosures. We'll work our way through that and we'll try to understand, are you still in development there? That means you're compiling the data, you're looking at what's required, and then working your way towards reporting a disclosure. And that really means a self-reported disclosure. And after that, we can look at that and do a verification. That means, have you actually included the right components in that disclosure? So we help you through that process. On the left here is a ESG baseline report. So this is a full report that we set. And then out of that, we also assign actions. And that really helps to keep driving that momentum and making sure that within the business, you have a really assigned actions to the responsible people to move things forward. You know what you're going to do this quarter. You know what you're going to do the quarters coming after. So it really helps you schedule some things, make sure that everyone's across what you're doing. But it also helps to feed that back to either management or the board and show them directly, on the one hand, that baseline, this is where we are today. Next quarter, we're going to do these following actions, which will help you really understand and drive also at that governance level, the insight and oversight on ESG. Because in the end, ESG is really something that should not only be operational, but also at a governance level really well understood with key insights, but also oversight on that. So drive that ESG narrative, drive that ESG understanding at the board level is a key element as well. And we have reports, action plans that really help you to communicate that back to your board. And those reports that we have, we really focus on two things. On the one hand, like I said, we focus on maturity. And that means what is the progress you're making from one quarter to the next. And if you look on the left here, this is an example from Province Resources, who've made some extremely good progress over the last few quarters. They set their baseline, and every quarter they work out what are the 3, 4, 5 key things, indicators, and some actions we're going to progress. And then over those quarters, we call reporting periods, you see that they move forward. They move a lot of yellow there in development, means in reported. Some of the reported indicators are verified. And what that really means is, like I said, you can see the progress they're making. Now, that's the maturity report, the progress report, and that's really useful to keep your stakeholders updated on what you're doing. But ultimately, a lot of stakeholders also want to see what are your actual disclosures. And that is generating that report in which you have all the indicators, and those disclosures you've crafted around each indicator are clearly in a very clean, simple, and straightforward language presented to them, so they can straight away see what you've done. And that's something then that you need to keep updated on a Most companies do that on an annual basis. Some companies choose to do that more frequent, or they select some indicators that they can update on a more frequently basis. Now that really brings us to the end of this quick overview of how you can kickstart your ESG journey with SocialSuite. The technology that we have really allows you to drive this process yourself. So it's really important that you get that support from our ESG expert team, that you can log in at any time and you're in charge of driving, tracking, measuring, managing your progress and getting those reports to your key stakeholders. The framework, like I said, it's recognized, it's standardized, and we really make sure that we're building workflows that help you step by step go through small quarterly actions that help you building that full disclosure set. We also have a really good resource library with educational videos. We have guidance documents. We have templates, pro formas. We're really trying to provide you with the resources, the coaching, and the advice to make sure that you get an understanding of what ESG is. You can move this forward. And that's one of the core benefits that we find as well. By having that self-driven approach there with coaching and expert advice basically at a mouse click away, it does mean that your team and your board as well are really close to what you're doing. And the key thing with ESG is that it becomes a core part of how you operate your business. That it's not a one-off reporting exercise for the sake of reporting that you do once a year, you spend 2 weeks on it and it's done and you don't think about it anymore. This quarterly reporting progress that we're demonstrating and that we're building into here in a mindset and way of doing business, make sure that ESG is always front of mind. And if you really, when an ESG risk comes along, you're ready there to mitigate it. And when an ESG opportunity presents itself, you can jump at it and everyone understands what you're talking about. And finally, what we really do is we also help to get that word out, because that journey and communicating the narrative and the journey is really important these days. We do a lot of visibility work in terms of a quarterly ESG progress pulse in which we feature companies working with us, our customers, the ESG leaders that we see make really good progress, but also some really good insights into that ESG landscape developments. But we also do regular media pieces. So there's a lot happening here if you join us. And if you join us today, you can really, within the next few days, set your baseline and get started. So it would be a really good way to end this year or to potentially kick off the next year. And I'll hand back from here to Jessica.
Great, thank you so much, Tim. That was fantastic. If everyone has questions, please don't hesitate. Pop in the chat box on the right there. You can also connect with us directly. I've put a link there to book straight into my calendar. And just quickly, while you're writing, we have an amazing opportunity at the moment where you could have a 2-minute clip with Sky News. So featured on live television, especially with a capital raise coming up, and that little clip you can feature on your webpage and circulate internally as well. And that's actually included in the SocialSuite fees. That's essentially 10,000 worth of media coverage included. So we only have 2 spots. So please, if anyone would be interested, please get in touch quickly. So just calling any questions. I don't see any. Oh, yes. Yes, the 15,000 fee is all inclusive. So it's a once-off annual upfront fee, which includes the 2-hour quarterly sustainability consulting with Dr. Tim, check-ins in between. You're absolutely not alone for those periods. We provide a lot of templates, media opportunities along the way as well, such as Sky News. We have ad hoc offers on the way. Also a big quarterly media campaign that we share with our big network of investment managers. Everything all inclusive. Yeah. Great. If there's any other questions, please don't hesitate to shoot me an email or connect. Oh, yes. Thank you, Susanna. Is the process evidence-based? Tim.
Very good question. Thank you. So how the process works is that you really start working on your set of disclosures. So what we see is the indicators itself, so the World Economic Forum framework, is evidence-based. That's been developed over years effectively. It's really been compiled by key experts. So we haven't really touched that framework in the sense of modified anything. You're reporting still genuinely to the World Economic Forum framework. What we do is we really make that reporting a lot easier, accessible, understandable, and actionable. But what you put in there in terms of evidence-based, it's really important that if you create your ESG disclosure, that you keep that audit trail. And that's what we're really helping you do, is that making sure that if you claim certain numbers, that you have the documents that back it up. So if you're saying my carbon footprint might be an X number of tons of carbon emissions that we generate each year, it's really important that you have done some that you have the tools in the back of there, the audit trail of how you've calculated that. In terms of how it fits into GRI and SASB, GRI and SASB, TCFD, CDP, they're all the frameworks that are actually consolidated. So you're actually reporting to GRI indicators, to SASB indicators, but what the World Economic Forum has done through the big four accounting firms is said, what are those core indicators that replicate themselves across GRI, SASB, etc., and how can we move them into a core framework? So if you have a look at the actual World Economic Forum white paper that lays out the framework, it's very clear where each indicator comes from. They link it directly back to the GRI, to SASB. In terms of IFC and the Equator principles, they're more safeguards in the sense that your social environmental impact assessment, those type of things, but again, a core part, they link into the work here that you do here. So for instance, one of the key indicators on the planet is on key biodiversity areas. So what that means, you need to report whether or not you're operating or have land that you either own or lease in a key biodiversity area. So for a lot of, say, operations that actually do drilling or exploration or mining that have a large footprint, they need to have done, most likely, to get a license or for the internal process, environmental social impact assessment. And out of that, they would have known what that assessment said, whether or not they are in a key biodiversity area. So they can disclose that then. They can disclose, our regulator or our mining license requires us to do an environmental impact statement. We've done that. It was done this year. Here's the PDF, 100 pages on our impact statement. Out of that, it might or might not have identified key biodiversity area. These are our environmental management plans. And then the framework from the World Economic Forum says, if you've identified that, you need to do a high value conservation assessment. So you need to do that, and it works you through those steps there as well. So there's a whole range. So the UN sustainability goals, I assume that that you refer to the SDGs, and I'd just like to refer back to that slide that we just looked at earlier. The SDGs directly fit with this framework. So the SDGs set, like I said, set goals and targets, while ESG is effectively methods and processes you use to demonstrate how you contribute to this framework. So in terms of, you want to know a bit more, and we've recorded this webinar, so just look back at the webinar and you hear me talk a bit more about that link between SDGs and ESG. But thanks for the great questions. I hope that that I answered them.
Yeah, and please feel free to book and we can go through any particular questions in detail. This is absolutely a revenue generating exercise. All of our members have experienced incredible capital raising, very fast experiences, also increased number and quality of stakeholders. And all the feedback has been they just didn't realize what was out there until they started, essentially. Yeah, so please, we'd love to connect and chat further. Don't hesitate to book in. Thank you very much for your time today, Tim and everyone. That was great. Thank you. We'll talk soon. Thank you so much. Bye.